Welcome to Snail's Story, where every tale is a gentle step toward healing. Today, we invite you to listen to the journey of a single mother, a woman once humiliated by her own family. Right in the middle of her sister's wedding, she didn't speak out to demand justice. She didn't cry to be defended, and yet one man stood up. In the midst of a glittering banquet, he chose kindness over silence. What seemed like a cruel turning away became the beginning of something unexpected, a path toward the light, where compassion still finds room to bloom. If you believe in stories that heal and resonate deeply, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this journey with someone you believe deserves to be heard too. Evelyn Hart never thought she'd attend another family gathering she had once promised herself. She would never seek acceptance from anyone, especially not from those who knew only how to wound with words. But when the old mailbox creaked open with a familiar click, and in her hands lay an ornate cream gold wedding invitation with the name Clarissa May Hart embossed in the center, Evelyn froze for several seconds. Clarissa, her half-sister. The one Evelyn used to carry to preschool, used to bike with to the bookstore back when their father was alive. And also the one who had mocked her for years with words like, "Your mom is the stain of this family. Do you think being a bastard is something to be proud of?" The invitation had come by post. No message, no heads up. But Evelyn knew whether or not they loved her. Her family was very skilled at appearances. Sending the invitation was probably Clarissa's way of proving she was gracious. Evelyn sat down at the old dining chair, eyes fixed on the gold-lettered line. "We are honored to invite you and one guest to join in our family celebration." One guest. She glanced at Ivy, her 9-year-old daughter, sitting on the floor, coloring in drawings of tiny cats. Ivy was everything Evelyn had. It's the reason she worked late shifts at a small diner. It's the reason she didn't collapse every time a new debt notice arrived in the mail. The only person who had ever asked, "Mommy, do you have a family? Do I have any relatives?" Like how Lila has grandparents, and an aunt, and a cousin. That question had caught in Evelyn's throat more times than she could count. Because to Ivy, the world was simple. Everyone had people to go home to for the holidays. Everyone had a crowd called family. And now, this wedding might be the first and possibly only chance for Evelyn to show her daughter that her mother wasn't completely severed from her own bloodline. She looked up, placed a hand on Ivy's hair, and smiled gently. "Ivy, would you like to go to a wedding? There'll be sweets, music, and maybe even a pretty dress." The girl's eyes widened. "Really, Mom? Who's getting married? Aunt Clarissa?" Evelyn said softly. Ivy had never met Clarissa, but she still squealed with delight, as if she'd been invited to a fairy tale ball. Evelyn knew this wasn't a fairy tale, but she also knew every child deserves a moment to dream, even just once. That night, after Ivy had fallen asleep, Evelyn opened her closet. In the corner hung a charcoal gray dress, one she had worn to a job interview 5 years ago. The cuffs were worn, frayed, but the seams held. She smoothed the fabric, sighed, then texted her friend Marlena, one who had kept a few old reception dresses after quitting her hostess job. The next morning, Marlene replied, "I have a light blue dress, slightly worn, but still decent. I kept it for sentimental reasons, but you need it more now. And don't forget to tie Ivy's hair up pretty. She's a princess, after all." Evelyn chuckled, a laugh that was warm and a little bitter. On the afternoon before the wedding, mother and daughter sat together sewing a cream-colored bow out of scrap fabric for Ivy's hair. Evelyn sat on the floor, resting her head against the couch, watching. Her daughter carefully snipped threads, lips pressed together in concentration. "I want to wear a white dress like the bride," Ivy whispered. "Someday you will," Evelyn said, running her fingers through Ivy's hair. "But today, we're guests. Remember that, little princess. Guests walk gently, eat just enough cake, and keep their smiles bright. What about you, Mommy? Evelyn paused for a moment. Then she said, I'll smile too. Because I'm walking in with the only family I've got. And so they set off Evelyn and Ivy toward a place Evelyn had once sworn she'd never return. 2. The Lancaster Hotel Grand Hall, the venue for Clarissa Hart's wedding. Armed with a borrowed invitation, a borrowed dress, a pair of worn-out shoes, and a little girl who carried the quiet dream of being called niece in a family where her mother had once been the one forgotten. The taxi pulled up in front of the Lancaster Hotel at exactly 4 p.m. The revolving glass door turned slowly, revealing a grand lobby adorned with glittering chandeliers and the soft strains of a spring symphony played by a live string ensemble. Ivy clutched her mother's hand tightly. She wore a simple white dress cinched at the waist with a silver ribbon, her hair neatly tied up in a bun, adorned with the handmade bow she and her mother had sewn together. To Evelyn, her daughter looked like the most beautiful child in the world, and that was exactly what made her afraid. Inside the wedding hall, everything looked as though it had been pulled from the pages of a luxury bridal magazine, white silk covered. Tables, crystal glasses lined up with precision, and vibrant red roses forming an arch from the entrance to the stage. The guests, impeccably dressed, chatted politely, their smiles rehearsed. Their eyes quick to assess, Evelyn walked past them all, keeping her back straight, gently squeezing Ivy's hand. Ms. Evelyn, a female voice called from the reception desk. A young woman in a uniform looked her up and down. Are you attending alone? No, I'm here with my daughter, Evelyn replied, placing the invitation on the counter. The woman scanned the guest list, then gave a tight smile. Yes, Ms. Evelyn, and little Ivy table 17. She quickly pointed toward the far end of the room, right next to the back exit. Evelyn pressed her lips together, nodded, and led her daughter past rows of beautifully decorated tables. She could feel the glances, some curious, some indifferent, and one familiar. It was the gaze of Deirdre, her stepmother, standing among a group of aristocratic women, champagne glass in hand, lips painted a deep red. When their eyes met, Deirdre didn't greet her. She simply arched an eyebrows, if assessing an object pulled out of storage. No words of welcome, not even a nod. Mom, why is that lady looking at us like that? Ivy whispered. Evelyn bent down and held her daughter's hand. It's okay, remember? We're here for cake. Table 17 had exactly 2 chairs. Beside it was a staff-only emergency exit sign, and a large black trash bin had been moved against the wall conveniently out of the camera's frame. No one else sat near them. Evelyn sighed and pulled out a chair for Ivy. She wasn't surprised by the placement. Years ago, when her father was still alive, she'd been part of family gatherings, but always as the one fetching drinks, wiping tables, feeding her little sister. After her father passed, Deirdre took control of the household, and Evelyn, though the eldest daughter, became no more than an unwanted guest. She still remembered what Deirdre once told her, cold and direct. I'm not obligated to raise another woman's child. Stay if you can survive. Otherwise, get out of my sight. Evelyn had been just 19 then. The years that followed only got worse. She got into university on a partial scholarship, but had to work as a waitress to stay afloat. When she became pregnant, she called home begging for shelter. Just for a few months, it was Clarissa who answered. You chose to sleep with some guy and got pregnant. Now you want to come back and make me look bad? No one stood up for her. No one asked, who's the father? No one knew that the man was a family friend, her father's close companion, who had promised to take care of her, then vanished the moment she told him. No one knew. Because Evelyn never told. When the world already assumes you're the one at fault, you grow too tired to explain otherwise. Are you hungry? Evelyn asked. Ivy shook her head, but her stomach let out a quiet rumble. A staff member brought 2 glasses of water and 2 small plates with butter cookies. No pastries, no juice like the other tables. Evelyn looked up, about to speak, but the staffer had already turned and walked away. "Mommy, this place is like a princess castle," Ivy whispered, eyes wide as she gazed at the glittering ceiling. "Yes, and you're my little princess. What about you?" Evelyn smiled, though something dimmed behind her eyes. "I'm the one who follows the princess to keep her safe." Ivy didn't fully understand but she squeezed her mother's hand tighter. The ceremony hadn't started. Clarissa had yet to appear. Evelyn glanced at the clock. 4:30 p.m., just a few more minutes until all the lights would turn toward the bride, a woman Evelyn had called sister all her life, but who had never once called her sister in return. She didn't know what was waiting for her tonight. She only knew that for Ivy she would sit at that forgotten table. She would smile, she would not cry, and she would not let anyone familiar or stranger see the cracks in her heart. Soft harp music began to play. The grand doors slowly opened, and every pair of eyes turned toward the end of the red carpet. Clarissa entered. She wore an ivory white wedding gown tailored to hug her figure, its lace train trailing behind her with elegance. A young flower girl followed closely, lifting the hem with each of Clarissa's graceful steps. In her hands was a bouquet of purple peonies, her favorite flower. No, it was the favorite flower of Evelyn's mother, who had passed away when Evelyn was still a child. The sight made Evelyn freeze. Clarissa had never met her mother, but today she used that image as the backdrop for her picture-perfect entrance. Applause filled the hall. Clarissa smiled, radiant, striding past cameras and crowds like a queen. And when her gaze swept past Table 17, where Evelyn and Ivy sat, she gave it the briefest glance, like one might glance at an out-of-place decoration, and looked away. No greeting, no nod. Evelyn said nothing. She simply watched. The ceremony itself passed quickly. Vows exchanged, rings placed, a kiss on the cheek, applause and confetti. Everything looked perfect at least on the surface. Then the reception began. Lights dimmed. The stage lit up. Clarissa returned in a burgundy-red evening gown, shoulder-bearing, form-fitting, designed to captivate every gaze. She stepped onto the stage to cheers and whistles. The microphone switched on. Clarissa raised a hand to hush the crowd, smiling brightly like a stand-up comedian about to deliver her most prized performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "today is the most special day of my life. And I want to share a little bit of the past so you'll understand how I got here." The music stopped. A projector screen dropped down. Evelyn frowned. On the screen, a slideshow began. Childhood photos of Clarissa, ballet recitals, beach vacations, extravagant birthday parties. Then, suddenly grainy footage flickered onto the screen. A young woman, drenched in the rain, sat curled up at a bus stop, cradling a pregnant belly. Her face was hidden, but the figure, the hair, the way she wiped her tears with the back of her hand, was eerily familiar. Ivy sat up. "Mom?" Evelyn felt her breath vanish. Clarissa's voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "Some people think that tears and mistakes are reasons to demand sympathy. But today, I want to say, coming from a family full of chaos, I've made it here. On my own." The crowd chuckled. Some covered their mouths. Others exchanged smug glances. Clarissa laughed along, then added, "Even if certain guests have brought a few awkward memories, we still welcomed them with a modest chair in the coziest corner of the banquet." Evelyn's cheeks burned. Ivy looked up. "Why were you in that video, Mommy? Were you crying like that?" Evelyn couldn't answer. She stood up. Her body trembled slightly, but she held Ivy's hand firmly. She needed to get out. Anywhere but here, away from these stares that were half pity. half-dash amusement. But as she neared the side door, a staff member blocked her path. "Sorry, this area's not for guests. I want to step outside." "Oh, main." "Exits that way, ma'am. This is the service corridor." Evelyn turned her head. The main door was at the center of the hall, which meant to leave, she'd have to walk across the entire ballroom, under the eyes of nearly 200 whispering strangers. Ivy squeezed her mother's hand, her voice barely a breath. "Mom, if I hadn't come, would they still hate you?" Evelyn froze. She knelt down, placing her hand gently on her daughter's cheek. "No one has the right to hate us just for being here." Even if her heart was splintering into pieces. On stage, Clarissa continued her performance. Each word was a sharp-edged dagger wrapped in a dazzling smile. But then, amid the rising tension, a lone figure quietly stepped onto the stage steps. It was Arthur Langston, the groom. No one noticed at first. But when he reached over and touched Clarissa's microphone, saying just one line, "That's enough," the entire hall fell. Silent. Clarissa stared, wide-eyed. Evelyn stood still, and just like that, the tide began to turn. The entire banquet hall fell silent, as if someone had unplugged the sound system. Every eye turned to the stage where the groom Arthur Langston stood beside the bride. One hand gripping the microphone, the other fixed on Clarissa. "Enough," he said again, slower, this time clearer. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the polished facade Clarissa had wrapped around herself like a blade through silk. "What are you doing?" Clarissa gave a small, composed laugh, chin lifted. "This is my speech." "No. This is you humiliating someone," Arthur replied. "And I won't stay silent any longer." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Some guests paused mid-bite. A few discreetly raised their phones to record. Evelyn stood frozen in the corner. Ivy clung tightly to her hand, her tiny fingernails digging into skin, but Evelyn didn't feel the pain. Her eyes were fixed on Arthur, the man she'd only met once, 3 months ago at the menu tasting. Back then, she had delivered a tray of tarts to the kitchen, and he had politely greeted her, assuming she was part of the logistics team. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur addressed the crowd, his voice slow, steady. "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I can't pretend anymore. I can't smile, I can't raise a glass. And I can't enter this marriage if I stay silent about what I just saw." Clarissa reached for his hand, whispering, "Arthur, it was a joke. I just wanted to keep the mood light." Is mocking a single mother on a giant screen in front of 200 people your idea of lighthearted? The murmurs in the room shifted from curious to uneasy, from amused to stunned. Arthur looked down at Evelyn. Then he said, "Evelyn Hart is the bride's sister. She wasn't invited on stage. She wasn't introduced. She wasn't given an honorary seat. But she's the woman who has raised her daughter alone for 9 years, worked 3 jobs, and still held on to her kindness. And the worst part is," he paused, then pulled a thick envelope from his suit pocket. "This isn't the first time she's been humiliated. She was also the victim of identity fraud by her own family." A collective gasp swept through the room. Clarissa's face turned pale. What are you talking about?" Arthur held up the envelope. 3 weeks ago, I overheard Evelyn receiving a tense call from the bank at the restaurant. That prompted me to look into it. I discovered that 8 years ago, a credit loan of $18,000 was registered under her name, but the mailing address was Clarissa's old apartment. Clarissa took a step back. I only borrowed it. I needed the money she wasn't going to use her credit anyway, and when the debt came knocking, she was fired. Almost lost custody of her daughter. No one believed her, because the name on the papers was real. Arthur looked back at Evelyn. "I don't know why you stayed silent all these years. But I know this, Sif. I stay silent now. Then I'm no. Better than someone who shares a stage with a bully. No one applauded. Okay. No one picked up a fork. No one said a word, except for Deirdre, who suddenly stood up from the head table. Her face flushed. You have no right meddling in my family's affairs. Evelyn is the one who ran away. Now she comes back to ruin my daughter's wedding. Arthur turned to her. You call this a family? A family that forces a young girl out when she's pregnant. A family that hides wrongdoing behind silence. Deirdre looked ready to lash out again. But Norman Clarissa's stepfather gently placed a hand on her arm and urged her to sit. Arthur lowered his head slightly, then placed the envelope on the floral podium. I can't go through with this wedding. I can't vow love to someone who turns cruelty into entertainment, and I don't want the dowry either. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a check. Then he tore it in half, and again, until the pieces floated down like snow. Kindness can't be bought. And I most certainly don't need to buy into a family like this. Clarissa collapsed into a chair. No one went to her. Arthur descended the steps. Slowly, each one heavy as stone, as he passed by Evelyn, he said just one thing. You don't have to bow your head anymore. Then he walked out of the hall, in silence, no applause, no music. No one dared offer congratulations. Evelyn remained where she was. She couldn't tell if she was shaking from shock or from something utterly foreign and brand new. Being defended for the first time, not by a belated apology, but by a decisive act from someone who owed her absolutely nothing. After Arthur left the wedding hall. Time seemed to retreat with each step he took. The guests sat frozen like statues. The harp fell silent. The servers stood pressed against the walls, no one daring to slice the wedding cake or pour another glass of champagne. The air was so thick, it could have been cut with a knife. Clarissa remained motionless on the elevated chair on stage, hands clutching the folds of her gown, her face pale. Deirdre said nothing more, and no one came to comfort her. Only one little girl Eve looked up at her mother with wide, glistening black eyes, her voice trembling. Mom, why did they show you crying? Ha! I thought that was just our secret. Evelyn knelt down. Her hand cupped her daughter's cheek as gently as if touching glass. In her eyes was pain, not for herself, but for the child who had just witnessed something so cruel at a celebration she had looked forward to the most. I'm sorry, Evelyn whispered. I didn't think they would do that. I don't. Clarissa hates you. Evelyn was silent for a few seconds before answering, some people don't know how to love, so they fill that emptiness with cruelty. Ivy didn't understand it all, but she nodded. I don't want to be here anymore. Evelyn stood and squeezed her daughter's hand. Neither do I. The two of them walked quietly past the rows of tables. This time, no one stopped them. No one said goodbye. But the eyes were there. Not scornful anymore. Not quite sympathetic either. But something like belated awareness. As if they had just witnessed something undeniably wrong. Yet none had the courage to speak up. Evelyn didn't need their defense. She just needed her daughter to know that silence is not something to normalize. As they stepped outside the banquet hall, they ran into Mr. Norman, Deirdre's ex-husband, sitting alone in the marble-floored hallway. Evelyn, he called softly. She stopped. Ivy still held her hand tightly. I'm sorry, he said, looking straight at her. I should have done something a long time ago. When your father passed, I knew she was treating you poorly. But I chose silence. I was wrong. Evelyn gave a small nod. I don't hold it against you, but I can't go back to the past either. He looked at Ivy and said quietly, She looks just like her mother. Ivy bowed politely. Hello, sir. Mr. Norman smiled faintly and nodded. Evelyn knew that apology wouldn't erase anything. But it confirmed one thing she hadn't imagined. It all someone had seen. They had just chosen not to speak. They left the hotel under the weight of twilight. The sky had deepened into a dark velvet cloak, draping the city in cold, low notes. But inside the worn-down taxi, two hands still held each other, one small, one grown, gripping something very fragile. Dignity. Evelyn looked down at Ivy, who was resting on her shoulder, eyelids growing heavy. Her hair had come undone. The bow had slipped. Evelyn gently fixed it and exhaled. Slowly, today, she had been humiliated. But also today, someone had stood up for her. And most importantly, her daughter had seen it all. Not to be hurt, but to learn that silence is not always strength. That night, after returning home, Evelyn took off the dress, washed her daughter's face, and the two lay down on their small bed just big enough for one adult and one child. Ivy turned over and whispered, "Mom, if one day someone hates me, would you stand up for me?" Evelyn pulled her close. "I wouldn't even need to stand up because I wouldn't let anyone hurt you like that in the first place." Ivy nodded, pressing her face against her mother's chest. The room was quiet, but inside Evelyn, something had begun to grow. Not anger, not resentment, but freedom. Freedom from the hope of being loved by people who never deserved her. And freedom to teach her daughter how to live without ever apologizing for simply existing. The next morning, just as Evelyn finished washing the dishes, her phone started ringing non-stop. At first, she thought it was the school. Maybe Ivy forgot her homework or had a stomachache. But then an unfamiliar number showed up. Another call followed immediately. Then a message popped up. "Are you the sister of the bride from yesterday? I'm a reporter from BuzzState." Evelyn froze in her tiny kitchen. She unlocked her phone and opened the news. Her name and Arthur Langston's were splashed. Cross headlines everywhere. Groom calls off wedding after public shaming of sister woman humiliated at wedding nand. What happened next? Silenced. The room man walks away from million-dollar wedding for a single mom. Alongside the headlines was a nearly 3-minute video starting from the moment Clarissa played the clip of Evelyn in the rain, to the moment Arthur took the microphone and said, "That's enough." The video had been shared over 2 million times. In just 12 hours, Evelyn was stunned. Not because of the sudden attention, but because Ivy might see it. And just as she feared, when she dropped Ivy off at school, a few parents looked at her curiously. One mom smiled and whispered, "You're very brave. I cried when I watched that clip." Evelyn gave a slight nod, pulling Ivy gently to walk faster. She didn't want her daughter to become the girl from the video. Didn't want the stares of other kids to make her feel different. That afternoon, back home, she turned off the phone's ringer, switched it to airplane mode, deleted all her social media accounts, then locked the phone away in a drawer. Ivy continued to draw like always. But during lunch, she murmured, "Mom, some kids at school said you're famous now." Evelyn pressed her lips together. "Being famous isn't always a good thing, Ivy. Should I be sad?" She looked at her daughter for a long moment, then gently said, "No, but you don't have to be happy either, because the best part of that day wasn't the video, ... 'Twas that I didn't run away." 3 days later, a major newspaper sent a formal interview request. A famous TV host issued a public apology on social media for joining in on the mockery of single moms without knowing the stories behind them. They called Evelyn the kind woman who endured in silence for far too long. Evelyn read it all, then deleted the email. She didn't need to be celebrated, because Evelyn knew if truth had to be proven by public tears and pain projected onto a giant screen, that wasn't justice. That was just a delayed spectacle from a society that never learned to stop cruelty at the source. That evening, Arthur called. For the first time since the wedding, Evelyn stared at the phone as it lit up with a name. Arthur L. She let it ring 3 times before picking up. "Are you all right?" His voice was deep, sincere. "Not too bad," she replied. "I've been through worse. I heard you declined every interview, 'cause I don't want my daughter to think that her mother needs to share pain to deserve support." Silence. On the other end, then Arthur said, "I understand." They both said nothing for a few seconds. Only the sound of wind slipping through Evelyn's window, and Ivy's voice in the background, reading aloud from an essay. "Family is where you don't have to apologize for being yourself." Evelyn smiled. "Arthur," she said softly, "I know you didn't do it for praise, but thank you for not." Looking away. His voice dropped. "I did it because I once had a mother who was looked down on too, and I did nothing as a child. I don't want to make the same mistake again." After the call, Evelyn returned to Ivy's room. The little girl had fallen asleep, clutching her sketchbook. On the page was a drawing of the 2 of them standing on a stage, both wearing crowns. She looked at her daughter, and something inside her eased. Tomorrow, more people might call. But today, she chose to hold on to the only thing that mattered: peace for her child, and a small, warm space in her heart to believe that true justice isn't found in noise. It's in the simple truth, no longer buried. 1 week after the video went viral across online platforms, Evelyn began receiving calls from numbers not saved in her contacts, but they were no longer reporters or media people. They were from Clarissa at first. Evelyn ignored them, but then came the 6th call, the 7th, the 8th, and finally, a text message. "I know you don't want to see me anymore, but please give me one chance. Just one. I don't know who else to apologize to except you." Evelyn sat still, staring at the phone screen for a long time. She didn't feel angry. She wasn't afraid. Just hollow, as if she were standing in front of a house that had burned to the ground. Only rubble and the scent of smoldering ash remained. She replied, "One time, 15 minutes. The park behind St. Paul's Church. Tomorrow afternoon." The next afternoon, Evelyn arrived. Early. She chose a bench beside the small pond where she used to bring Ivy to feed breadcrumbs to the ducks on weekends. Clarissa arrived 10 minutes late. No evening gown, no red lipstick, no high heels, just a 31-year-old woman in a wrinkled sweater, messy bun, and dark circles under her eyes. She sat down, unable to look Evelyn in the eye. "I don't know where to begin," Clarissa whispered. Evelyn kept her gaze on the pond, her hands clasped tightly. "Good, because I don't know what I'm supposed to hear." Silence stretched for a few seconds. Clarissa inhaled. "I was wrong. I know that, and there's no excuse good enough. I just never thought he'd choose to stand up for you, because I was someone worth looking down on. Wasn't I?" Evelyn said, eyes still on the water. "No, it's not like that," Clarissa rushed to explain. "I just always thought you'd stay silent. Like all those years before." Evelyn turned her head, her gaze sharp but not cruel. "So that gave you the right to humiliate me in front of 200 people. To show a video you secretly recorded of me pregnant, crying at a bus stop? Do you even realize I didn't have a single dollar that day? Even the bench I sat on was as wet as my pride when I called home begging for a place to stay." Clarissa bowed her head. "I know." Evelyn's voice hardened. "No, you don't. If you did, you wouldn't have used someone else's vulnerability as the backdrop for your spotlight." Clarissa bit her lip, then spoke through a choked voice. "I've lost everything. Arthur won't even look at me. My friends have turned their backs. And Mom, she blamed me. Said I should have been more subtle. Can you believe that?" Evelyn nodded slightly. "I can. She once told me I was the defective product of a dead woman. Clarissa looked up at her, tears spilling from her eyes. "Since I was little, I was told you were the reason my father left, that you made my mom miserable. I grew up believing you were a burden, something I had to outshine to be loved. And when you quietly disappeared, I felt like I'd won." Evelyn nodded again, this time slower, steadier. "And now you understand, don't you, that some victories are just emptiness framed in ego?" Clarissa wept, no longer pretending. No more tears for an audience, just a woman realizing that she was not the victim in this story, but the perpetrator, even if unintentionally. "I'm sorry." Evelyn looked at her sister. The girl who had once clung to her skirt in fear of ghosts at night, now crying like a child lost in a trap of her own making. "I forgive you." Clarissa looked up, wide-eyed. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean I'll start calling you sister again. Forgiveness is me putting down the weight of resentment for me, for my daughter." Clarissa nodded. "And one more thing," Evelyn added, her voice firm once again. "Don't ever involve my daughter in any of this again. If you want to make amends, start by disappearing from my life for a while. I need peace." Clarissa bit her lip. "I understand." Evelyn stood. She glanced down at the pond where a duckling swam between fallen leaves. "You'll never be like me," Clarissa whispered as Evelyn walked away. Evelyn paused but didn't turn around. "I know, because I've learned how to hurt without hurting others." That evening, when she got home, Ivy had finished folding an entire box of paper cranes. "Mom, do you have a wish?" Evelyn smiled and sat beside her. "I do. I wish that the people who once hurt me never turn me into someone like them." Ivy nodded and handed her the tiniest crane. "Then you'll be the first person with wings made from forgiveness." A month had passed since that afternoon in the park. Evelyn no longer received calls from Clarissa, nor messages from journalists or social media. Everything had begun to settle like a storm that had moved on, leaving behind an oddly quiet sky. But she didn't feel empty. On the contrary, for the first time in years, Evelyn felt like she was truly living, not surviving, not enduring, but breathing easily each morning. Waking Ivy with a genuine smile, she returned to her job at the small corner bakery where, loyal older customers still called her the girl with the warm baked touch, and often left spare change on the counter with notes that read, "For Ivy to buy comic books." She also began drawing again, like she did in her younger days, just simple illustrations of mothers and daughters, trees, and the little things she'd never had time to notice before. One afternoon, while wrapping up the last batch of apple tarts, the doorbell of the shop chimed. Evelyn looked up to see Arthur walking in. He wore a simple shirt, no blazer, no tie, so different from the groom he had once been a month ago. He stood at the counter, holding a slim leather notebook. "Would you like to buy some pastries?" Evelyn asked, as if they were strangers. Arthur smiled. "I would, but I was also hoping to invite the baker for a cup of tea after closing, if that's all right." Evelyn looked at him for a moment, then nodded toward the wooden chair by the window. "You can wait, 15 minutes left." Arthur took a seat. When the store finally closed, Evelyn brewed a pot of mint tea. She placed the cups on the table and sat across from him for the first time without any tension. No more groom and publicly shamed guest, just two people each carrying their own quiet wounds. "I still think about that day," Arthur began. "Not with regret, but I keep asking myself why I didn't do it sooner. You never owed me anything, but I used to stay silent in the face of injustice far too often. When my mom was abandoned by my dad, when the neighbors gossiped about her raising me alone, I looked the other way. I thought silence protected her, but really, it only made her lonelier." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes softening. "Maybe we were both taught the wrong way to love someone." Arthur nodded, then placed the leather notebook on the table. "I'm starting a new scholarship fund," he said. For girls like Ivy, bright, compassionate, but lacking opportunity. And I want you to be a co-founder. Evelyn frowned. Me? You're living proof that resilience can shape character. Not degrees or wealth. I don't need a professional consultant. I need someone who's walked through darkness and still chose kindness. Evelyn went still. I never thought I'd be right for anything that big. This isn't about something big. It's about something right. In the end, Evelyn nodded, not because she needed it, but because she knew some opportunities don't come to save you. They come to invite you out of hiding. As Arthur left, he paused at the door and turned to ask, "Do you and Ivy go anywhere on weekends?" "Yes," she replied. "Usually. The park or the library. Next time, if it's okay, may I invite the two of you for ice cream after story time?" Evelyn blinked, then smiled. "Only if you agree to stand in line and pay like a normal person." Arthur chuckled. "Fair deal." That evening, Evelyn told Ivy about the conversation, not like a fairy tale, but as a simple story between imperfect people. "So, does he love you?" Ivy asked, eyes twinkling. Evelyn laughed. "Where did you get that idea?" "I think he loves you the way you love me. Not loud, but always there when it matters." Evelyn looked at her daughter. Her heart suddenly light, like a piece of paper just folded into a crane's wing. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, she believed. Not everyone who enters your life is there to hurt you. Some people arrive just to remind you you deserve to step into the light with every part of yourself that once had to stay hidden. Asterisk. 2 months had passed since that conversation in the bakery. On the surface, Evelyn's life still followed the same rhythm, but beneath it, everything was quietly shifting. She still woke up early, baked pastries, walked Ivy to school, still brewed tea at 9 a.m. and wiped down the kitchen counter before 5. But now, once a week, she spent time at the headquarters of the Aurora Grant, the scholarship fund she and Arthur had co-founded. Named after the Aurora Borealis, a symbol of light. Appearing in darkness, she didn't have a private office or a gold-embossed business card. But Evelyn was consulted in every meeting, from media campaigns to letters sent to young girls receiving scholarships. Every time she signed E-Heart co-founder, her hands still trembled slightly, but her gaze held steady with trust. One quiet Friday afternoon, Arthur stopped by the bakery as usual. He came during the slow hour, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee and a small almond pastry wrapped in brown paper. Evelyn laughed when she saw the note he had stuck on it. "Not baked by you, but I swear it's still good." "You always come at this hour," she said, pouring more tea. "I know," he replied, "because I like seeing you when you're not rushing." She paused. Their eyes met and held, not tense, not awkward, just a gentle quiet. The kind that says what exists between us doesn't need a label. It just is real and steady. "There's something I want to ask," Arthur said, hesitantly. "But if it feels too soon, you can tell me no." "Go on," she said. He handed her an envelope. "It's an invitation to a community education conference in Seattle next month. You're listed as one of the featured speakers co-founders of independent education models. That includes you." Evelyn looked at the letter. Her eyes landed on the bolded text. "Guest speaker, Evelyn Hart, co-founder, the Aurora Grant. You want me to stand on a stage. You don't have to give a lecture," Arthur smiled. "Just tell your story. Way you tell it to Ivy, honest, unfiltered, no dressing it up. You don't know this, but just being there is enough to help someone believe there's a way out." Evelyn held the letter, her heart a tangle. She hadn't flown anywhere since Ivy was born. Never imagined being invited to speak. She was the person who used to mop the floors after conferences ended, not the one speaking on stage. That night, she told Ivy, "Where's Seattle, Mom?" "Far. We'd have to fly." "So are you going alone?" Evelyn almost said yes, But Ivy looked at her with something new. Not fear, but expectation. "Mom, do you know how brave you are?" "No, not really." "Then let me tell you. You're the first grown-up I've seen who said no to other grown-ups. You make me feel safe. I just don't want you to be hurt the way I was. Then you have to go. So other kids don't have to be like me." The next day, Evelyn texted Arthur, "I'll go, but only if you're sitting in the front row." Arthur replied with a photo of 2 plane tickets, one under Evelyn Hart, one under Ivy Hart economy class, seats side by side, and a message: "No one has to walk onto the stage alone." A month later, Evelyn stood behind the podium in a Seattle conference hall holding nearly 500 people. Her hands trembled. Her voice was raspy from nerves. But then she began to speak about the borrowed dress, about the wedding table next to a trash bin, about the look in her daughter's eyes as she watched her mother be humiliated in public. The room fell silent, and when she ended with, "I'm not standing here because I'm brilliant. I'm standing here because, for the first time, I didn't run." The applause roared like thunder. Arthur stood in the crowd, eyes fixed on the woman smiling from the stage, a woman who no longer needed anyone's validation yet had become a source of strength for hundreds. Evelyn stepped down, reached for Ivy's hand beneath the podium and knew, with certainty this time, she wasn't just surviving, she was finally living. 1 year after Evelyn stepped off the stage at the Seattle conference, her life had changed, but not in loud headline-making ways. She still woke up early, still washed her hands in cold water before kneading dough, still biked Ivy to school on that old cream-colored bicycle with a flower basket in front. But now, when people passed the corner where her bakery stood, they often paused to read the small sign hanging under the wooden awning. Heart and HOME, Pastries and Trust. 'Twas Evelyn's new shop, not big, but warm. A place where each pastry had a name: forgiveness, rise again, no running away. Strange names, perhaps, but ones that kept customers coming back because they felt nourished in more ways than one. Ivy was now 10. She could prepare her own breakfast and sometimes helped her mother fold pastry boxes for customers. Each week, she wrote a small letter to her mom and tucked it under her pillow. Every note ended the same way: "I'm proud to be born from someone." Like you, Evelyn read every slip of paper, kept them all in a wooden box, more precious to her than any speaking invitation or firm handshake. She no longer appeared on television, didn't sign brand deals, didn't attend events, because she had never wanted to be famous. She just wanted to be kind enough that her child would never grow up feeling ashamed. Arthur still came by every week. But now, he didn't bring coffee. He brought stories, updates on new scholarship initiatives, scribbled drawings from girls in remote villages. Each time he visited, he bought the same pastry as he did the first time. And each time he left, he tossed out a seemingly casual question: "Do you think if we opened a place like this in Vermont, it'd catch on? If I asked a certain woman to take a fall walk with me, would it be too cheesy? If another child called you mom one day, do you think your heart would have room?" Evelyn only smiled. She never answered, but one early autumn afternoon, as sunlight poured through the bakery window, Ivy leaned in and whispered to her mother, "I saw the way Mr. Arthur looked at you, like you're the best thing he's ever found." Evelyn smiled, then bent down to whisper back, "That's because I think he's right." That night, after locking up the bakery, Evelyn found a letter left on the counter. The handwriting was familiar. The envelope, a soft shade of blue dot. "Dear Evelyn, if one day you choose to step out of the shadows and live beside someone, not because you need to, but because you want to, please let me know. No promises required, no grand wedding. It's just one thing: that you believe you deserve to be loved without needing permission." Arthur. Evelyn folded the letter. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She simply poured herself a cup of tea, stood at the window overlooking the quiet street. And for the first time in her life, didn't feel alone. A few weeks later, on a Saturday morning, the bakery opened. Later than usual, inside, Ivy sat at the side table, focused on writing a new sign, heart and home pastries, and a little bit of unconditional love. Evelyn stood behind the counter, apron on, eyes lit by morning sunlight. She didn't wear a wedding dress. She wore no diamond ring, only a small handkerchief, embroidered with 3 names, Ivy, Arthur, E., neatly folded in her pocket. Because love doesn't always begin with a proposal, and a real home doesn't need a gate or a banner, just 3 people willing to step inside with hearts ready to heal each other. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this story isn't a proposal or a sweet ending. It's freedom when a woman once dismissed dares to step out of the shadows and, for the first time, lives for herself. It's the gaze of a child who looks at her mother with unwavering belief, and it's love quiet, unannounced, that simply stays long enough for you to believe. You are worthy of being loved. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of today's story. If something in this touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe to Snail Story, and leave a comment so we can continue walking together on more journeys of healing.